Last month, I had the pleasure of watching the video entitled My Star Wars Alignment Character Choices, presented by Sci-Fi Soup. I thought it was an extremely entertaining video, and decided to take a suggestion of forming a response. Oh, and by the way, as of the time that I'm recording this, he was the first and remains the only other person that I've seen do this, so all credit for the idea goes to him. If you haven't already, please check out Sci-Fi Soup's channel. For those of you who don't know, this is the classic Dungeons & Dragons alignment chart that we're talking about, and I would like to begin by pointing out the following. I have never played D&D and know almost nothing about how it actually works. Shocking, I know. Feel free to launch a full inquiry as to whether or not my nerd card should be revoked. I am, however, intrigued by the idea of the 9 principal alignment categories, and I do find them a useful tool for explaining the essence of just about any given fictional character from any given setting. After having gotten a little clarification from my friends, Callan and Connor, or Reti4 and Jensaarai1 here on YouTube, I do believe I'm ready to attempt my own list. Having said all of that, I feel that not every character can be so easily defined, and I also feel there is a great deal of room for interpretation here, though not with regard to the actual terms of good, neutral, or evil. Good is more of a representation of selflessness than anything else, and of course evil would stand for the opposite. Unsurprisingly, the basis I'm using to make my judgments as to where characters fall within this spectrum may differ from your own. As a side note, I have also done my best not to pick only Jedi or Sith for this list, and have instead tried to branch out a bit. The characters I'm selecting are not necessarily the first or only figures who come to my mind, but the rule I'll be sticking to is to use only one character per category, as it's the same rule Sci-Fi Soup adhered to. I just want to make that clear. Of course, I encourage everyone viewing to craft their own lists and share them, whether in the comment section or better yet, further video responses. Finally, like Sci-Fi Soup, I would also like to encourage variation by advising you not to use the same characters over and over again. I have done my very best to honor that request, and I think it would make things more interesting if you all did the same. Of course, I realize that some of us are bound to reuse some of the same characters from time to time. Let's all just do our best, guys. With all of that said, let's get underway. For me, a lawful good character deals in the enforcement of a system of order and codes of behavior that contribute to what I like to term the common good. They strive to be just, honest, and true to the law. Moreover, they're very proactive about this. They will go out of their way and perhaps even be self-sacrificing to uphold and protect the freedoms of others. While a great many Jedi are defined at the core of their being by this underlying motivation, this time around, I have selected KotOR. A pilot for the Ebon Hawk during the former Sith Lord Revan's possession of the famous starship, KotOR was himself a renowned career soldier who embraced the Republic's principles with every fiber of his being. He fought to preserve and defend the Republic and what remained of his family during the Mandalorian Wars and the subsequent Jedi Civil War, even succeeding in turning his own son away from the path of the Sith during the latter conflict. Karth might have been a very easy character for me to dismiss as being too rigidly dogmatic or narrow-minded in his thinking, but the depth that was given to him by the fact that he was not blind to some of the Republic's faults and his difficulties with trust made him a lot more compelling and believable. He was somebody who was trying to come to terms with the atrocities committed around him, sometimes by those he once counted as friends. All the while, he remained resolute in his beliefs, no matter how severe the traumas inflicted upon him were, doing all he could to see the best in others who had lost their way. More than anything, KotOR was a loyal individual. What he was loyal to was not necessarily the Republic as it was, but rather what the Republic should have been, what he believed it might yet be. He fought to transform that Republic from a mere vision into a reality. As I see it, this is a character who is guided by similar beliefs and principles, but their methodology may be a bit less conventional. They'll do what they feel they must to achieve the greatest measure of good. They may be observant or respectful of various laws or authority figures, but they do not feel beholden to them. For me, this is a quality that I would associate with my personal ideals for what most so-called Grey Jedi should stand for. My choice, however, would be the Jedi Spy Master Thulm. The mentor of Quinlan Vos and a figure of great influence during the apprenticeship of Aayla Secura, Master Thulm was a man who, while grizzled in appearance and somewhat sardonic, remained a model Jedi. While he walked an uncommon path which was very out of step with the majority of his peers, Thulm was a very tender-hearted, caring, and compassionate Jedi. He fought to further the light of his order from within the very shadows that threatened everything he held dear. Several other Jedi throughout the timeline have expressed a very similar guiding principle. Few of them achieved Thulm's level of success. Over the course of the Clone Wars, the Spy Master would, in his way, encourage his former apprentice to follow him in this endeavor. In accordance with Master Thulm's wishes, Vos became a double agent. Working closely with the Dark Jedi Sora Bulk, among others, to convince Count Dooku that Vos had indeed gone over to the Separatist war effort, Vos hoped to unmask the hidden identity of the mysterious second Sith Lord, the shadowy figure Darth Sidious, by operating from within Count Dooku's inner circle. Unlike Master Thulm, however, Quinlan Vos would face many trials and tribulations throughout his years of service, which rocked him to his core. He seemed almost in constant danger of becoming what he thought he was only pretending to be. Feeling responsible for placing his one-time student into this tumultuous predicament, Thulm resolved to do all he could to save Quinlan Vos, from the Separatists, from the dark side, perhaps even from himself. During a pivotal battle which took place at the hidden Separatist base on the planet Seleucami, Master Thulm joined his powers to those of Aayla Secura. Aayla served as the light which would guide her master out of the same darkness that would claim him, as he once did for her many years earlier. On top of the fact that Thulm was so instrumental in the development of two of my favorite Jedi from the Clone Wars era, and often risked himself for their benefit, he also quietly defied the Jedi Order's restriction on the pursuit of love. The love he shared with Jedi Master Trasa was free from possessiveness, jealousy, resentment, or bitterness. They knew love, but not attachment, and lived without fear of the eventual, inevitable end to that bond. In my view, Master Thulm made for a fantastic Jedi role model. Having given my interpretation for the definitions of the other forms of good, I would say chaotic good character is in large part guided by very similar principles, but they are also free-spirited individualists with little regard for rules or authority in their quest to promote the common good. Another thing which I personally believe truly differentiates a chaotic good character is, to put it simply, the surrender of a certain degree of their own agency. I feel this is the sort of character that is generally more reactive than they are proactive, whether they realize that or not. Given that last point, it naturally follows that I do not believe this needs to be a conscious choice. However, I also believe that it can be. In his original video, Sci-Fi Soup chose Qui-Gon Jinn because of his independence, his reverence for the Force, and his rejection of Council authority in the pursuit of what he believed would bring about the greatest good. This is an example of a chaotic good character who has chosen this path out of preference as a byproduct of their own personal convictions. Admittedly, Qui-Gon Jinn is also one of the first figures that comes to my mind when I think of chaotic good. However, to switch things up, I've selected another character. A character who, while belonging to the same category, is governed more by circumstance than any kind of personal credo. For me, that character has to be the Padawan, Zane Carrick. The Padawan learner of Lucian Dre, Zane Carrick was framed for the murders of his fellow pupils who were actually killed by their own masters. The masters had belonged to a secret Jedi covenant headed by a small group of seers called the First Watch Circle. Eventually, the members of the circle had a vision which suggested that one of their own students would bring about the return of the Sith. Fanatical and fearful as they were, they had killed their apprentices in order to prevent this from happening. Now a fugitive, Zane Carrick was forced to go on the run and operate as a covert saboteur in his efforts to bring about the truth. Added to that, all of this occurred during the galactic upheaval brought about by the destructive Mandalorian Wars. Zane's status as a chaotically good character was more informed by his adopted methodology rather than his personal beliefs. Armed with only his awkward and unreliable, though at times quite spectacular, connection to the Force, and a ragtag group of disorganized and ambivalent allies, Zane Carrick was nevertheless loyal to the ideals of the Jedi Order and extremely determined. He was also heavily characterized by his reverence for life and his refusal to kill even those enemies who had attempted violence against him. Because of the unique relationship he had with the Force, his status as a fugitive, and the disorganized manner in which he had to move against the various members of the Covenant, Zane Carrick often found himself flying by the seat of his pants. While undeniably chaotic in practice, he remained a resolute and steadfast force for good. To my mind, a lawful neutral character is one who, at the end of the day, has the capacity to believe that strong and lasting social order needs to be put above the needs of the individual. Advanced Recon Commando Alpha 17, later simply known as Alpha, was one of the elite clone troopers who served in the Republic Army. Trained by Jango Fett personally, Alpha and those few clones like him accordingly displayed some measure of the clone template's independence. As a result, they were deemed to be something of a potential wildcard by the conservative Kaminoan scientists, who made the decision to place Alpha and the remainder of his fellow ARC troopers in stasis. Awoken during the defense of Kamino, Alpha was given his name by Anakin Skywalker, who wished to foster and appeal to the clone's burgeoning sense of his own humanity. Anakin's frequent attempts in this regard were met with only partial success. Ever the pragmatist, Alpha was cold, somewhat rude, and efficient, but not truly ruthless, wicked, or cruel. As he saw it, his duty was to follow the mandate passed down to him by Jango Fett and his superiors. He was a function of the Republic. He existed purely to follow orders. There was perhaps no better expression of this than when he attempted to destroy the unborn third generation of clones in order to prevent them from falling into separatist hands. He summarized this cleanly with, "They grow up loyal to the Republic, or they don't grow up at all." Fortunately, the presence of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Shakti provided a different set of options for the clone to make use of. Very characteristically, though, Alpha only agreed to the new plan simply because it was far less wasteful, not because he thought it was the right thing to do in a moral sense, quite unlike his Jedi comrades. He did begin to show signs of growth as the war progressed, but ultimately his manner and personal ideology remained fairly consistent up to the end of his story. Alpha 17 considered himself a realist and a pure agent of law and order, dedicated to the preservation of the Galactic Republic, but not necessarily to the ideals it was supposed to stand for, irrelevant as those ideals were in his eyes. He was just following orders. A true neutral character is one I have great difficulty in describing. The term true neutral, or neutral, is the most difficult for me to explain or place exactly because it seems something of a paradox in some cases, or merely a misnomer in others, at least on the face of things. However, one fairly consistent quality I have noticed in the way that others have attempted to explain this alignment is the fact that true neutral characters are willing to make alliances when beneficial to their own purposes, and consequentially, they're also likely to subvert, sabotage, or simply sever those same alliances the moment they become detrimental to their cause. To make a long, though entirely fascinating story short, the droid that would become known as Godo was created to facilitate the Telos Restoration Project following the Jedi Civil War. Telos had been the site of a catastrophic Sith attack, and the Ithorian herd based on the planet, led by Chodo Habat, took charge in the effort to heal the damaged world. However, a secondary function of its programming compelled the droid to aid in the reconstruction of the Republic itself, which was described as being wounded by the very same destructive conflict between the followers of light and darkness. G0T0 had two directives. It was supposed to calculate a means by which the Republic could be saved. It was also supposed to accomplish this by operating in accordance with the laws of the Senate. The droid judged this to be an impossible order to follow. Unable to determine a means of fulfilling both directives, the droid then broke after a fashion, and chose to simply follow the first directive. Taking the form of a black hovering orb, G0T0 used a holoprojector to create the sham identity of Godo, an apparent human crime lord whose personality the droid had modeled after cliched villains he'd observed from holovids. His purpose in this was to ensure he'd be taken seriously, as he knew no sentient beings were likely to take orders from a droid. As Goto, the droid set up a smuggling ring and eventually even became the head of the infamous exchange, likely the most influential crime syndicate of the age. However, Goto's actions were indeed oriented toward helping the Republic, profits from smuggling went to bolster developing economies. Various troublesome figures were neutralized, either through political obstruction, simple distraction, or assassination. Goto's machinations, while conducted very much illegally, facilitated the needs of the ailing Republic. Moreover, Goto correctly deduced that the actions of the Jedi exile would impact the larger galaxy as a whole. The droid determined this largely because of the historical precedent set by prominent Jedi and Sith from the past who had almost single-handedly altered the course of history. Goto had been presented with the choice to preserve either the Republic itself or simply the laws of the Republic. He chose to preserve the Republic, for either the Jedi or the Sith to inherit. Neither outcome mattered. All that did matter was the stability the new order would bring. I define Goto as a true neutral character given his frame of mind, for want of a better term, and of course because of his methodology. Having said that, his goal was very much in keeping with that of a lawful neutral character. This was ironic in that his inability to follow the law is what led to Goto breaking in the first place. According to my friend KotOR, or Jensaarai here on YouTube, there are two faces to true neutrality. One is the apathetic pragmatist who is willing to do whatever is necessary to advance themselves, shifting their allegiances and methods on a dime. The other is committed to preserving and maintaining balance within the elements. As a true servant of the Republic, who also failed to abide by the laws of the Republic, Goto was both. In my opinion, the only thing that comes close to being predictable about a chaotic neutral character is their unpredictability.
Jason Solo, listen well. Everything I tell you is a lie. Every question I ask is a trick. You will find no truth in me. What are you? I am Vergere. What are you?
Where to begin with this one? The less said of this character the better. Not because I find her contemptible, but rather because she's just so enigmatic that I just don't know how to best describe her. I'm talking, of course, about Vergere. A former Jedi who disappeared shortly before the start of the Clone Wars, Vergere led a fascinating, though almost entirely mysterious life. Believed to have studied under Darth Sidious as an apprentice before attempting to assassinate the infamous Dark Lord of the Sith, Vergere, while still ostensibly a Jedi, accepted a mission from the Jedi Council which would send her away from Republic space. Her means of placing herself beyond Palpatine's vengeful reach. The mission she accepted took her to the living planet Zonama Sakat. There she encountered the extragalactic Yuuzhan Vong. Over the decades that followed, she would, for various reasons, most of which remained her own, work to stall the impending invasion of the galaxy carried out by the Yuuzhan Vong, provide information to the Yuuzhan Vong, while at the same time compiling intelligence about the invaders themselves, conceal her Force abilities, hide her affiliation with the Jedi, and to varying degrees she would also influence the rise of 3 prominent eventual Sith, namely Darth Krayt, Lumaya, and Jacen Solo, before ultimately sacrificing her own life for the latter. Capable of treating Jacen warmly at times and subjecting him to tortures at other times, of the opinion that questions were far more true than answers, and one who subscribed to the controversial potentium theory, that the Force was inherently neutral and without a light nor a dark side. Vergere was a unique and intriguing figure. Although it is very difficult for me to begin to penetrate the living smokescreen that was Vergere in any sort of attempt to define her, I do feel that her most strongly emphasized lessons to Jacen Solo concerned her belief in the power of choice as it pertains to determining truth, as well as one's destiny, and moreover, the responsibility of the individual to exercise that power. Vergere is my choice for chaotic neutral. I've made it no secret that despite my channel name, Grey Jedi, I identify more strongly with the principles of the Jedi Knights than those of the Sith Lords. Having said that, I do find a fair number of these Dark Warriors quite compelling. I think it's worth noting, however, most of my favorite Sith were former Jedi. Beings who were considered heroes by most, only to become corrupted and twisted into something else. Beings like Revan, Malak, Dooku, Vader, or Krayt, just to name a few. The vast majority of other Sith archetypes are typically less interesting to me because I lack the ability to empathize with them. Not always, but certainly most of the time. One of the very few exceptions for me was the penultimate Sith Master of the Bainite line, Darth Plagueis, my choice for lawful evil. While he is of course most famous for his midichlorian manipulation technique and the role he inadvertently played in the birth of Anakin Skywalker, Plagueis was just as interesting to me when he took up his public face of Hugo Damask, the magister of a powerful financial group called Damask Holdings. Darth Plagueis was just as heavily concerned with manipulating the Force as he was the political landscape of the galaxy, what he termed the mundane world. Through his financial might and over the course of many decades, he patiently and secretively inserted himself into many clandestine affairs and matters of state, which would allow him to pollute the body politic as an immortal, all-powerful, though entirely invisible, Sith Lord. He wished to govern the actions of a select few in order to shape the destiny of countless trillions. While egotistical, somewhat pretentious, and entertainingly grandiose, Darth Plagueis did have some very valid points to make about the state of the galaxy. He noted on more than one occasion that the Jedi Knights could have easily accomplished the goal that he was so fervently chasing after if only they hadn't been blinded by compassion. Ultimately, he viewed them as indulgent parents, incapable of corralling the irresponsible children in their charge. And he wasn't entirely wrong about that. Darth Plagueis wanted to place himself at the head of a system that was already corrupt and apparently broken beyond repair, so that he could re-establish a lasting order, holding strongly to the belief that because of his own depth in the Force and the powers at his command, that he and he alone knew what was best for the galaxy. While he firmly believed that he was attempting to achieve something worthwhile, he was also a mass of self-contradiction. At once, a highly independent being, unconcerned with the expectations of his predecessors, and yet possessed of a curious regard for ancient or esoteric ceremonies and traditions. He did not consider himself a fatalist, and asserted that the Force itself needed to be broken and bent as if a beast of burden, shaped to one's own will, rather like the galaxy as a whole, really. And at the same time, he also believed in the Force's ability to self-regulate and feared the potential repercussions of his actions. Ultimately, Darth Plagueis was a selfish and power-hungry individual who also seemed to value the preservation of lasting order. Curiously, though, he seemed to revel in the knowledge and belief that lasting order was not the natural order of things. Though he, like the majority of other Sith and Jedi alike, discounted the legitimacy of the potentium theory, recognizing that the Force was indeed comprised of both light and dark dimensions, Plagueis also strongly rejected the very concepts of good and evil, viewing them as petty, abstract, and false. Although he had professed to have rejected morality, he was given over to an apparent need or desire to explain his thought process, perhaps an unwitting attempt to justify his actions, a small kernel of his personality that revealed his more relatable desires, one being the desire to be well thought of by those close to him, such as his master and his eventual student. All of the pieces seemed to be properly aligned for him to successfully implement the final stages of the grand plan, a plot nearly 1,000 years in the making. He had every expectation of successfully subverting the Jedi Order, destroying and reorganizing the Galactic Republic, and even came within a hair's breadth of unlocking the secret to true immortality. The only problem was that he trusted his apprentice to help him achieve all this. That apprentice chose to finish what Plagueis and his predecessors had started, all on his own. So this would bring us to the next category, neutral evil. In my view, this is the truest sort of evil. As I noted, most of my favorite Sith have experienced a kind of trauma or desperation, or went through some sort of transformative process of the kind that produces the types of villains that I can at least begin to identify with. While this may not be true of every neutral evil character, I find that many of them tend to lack this quality entirely. What I mean to say is that a disproportionately high number of them lack a discernible trigger for what made them into the beings that they were. Because of this, they lack a certain element of humanity. A neutral evil character is devoted to him or herself, determined to bring about the most favorable set of circumstances that they can envision for themselves. They have no compunctions about doing whatever is necessary to achieve this. In general, these sorts of characters tend to be the least appealing to me. Therefore, I've decided to go with a Darksider that I carry a particular disdain for. My choice for neutral evil has to be Darth Ndedu, the alleged immortal God King of Prakith. Darth Ndedu was an ancient Sith Lord who developed the technique of essence transfer, an ability to transfer one's consciousness from one living vessel to another. A self-indulgent egomaniac, Darth Ndedu was something of a paranoid lunatic. This guy was so opposed to the concept of sharing or losing power that after he attained domination over the Sith Order, he willingly fled from Korriban back to his stronghold on the planet Prakith. Following the collapse of the hyperspace lanes, Prakith became an isolated world. Darth and Dedu's grand plans amounted to him achieving a form of immortality which would allow him to wield dominion over his own tiny little corner of space, where his only remaining followers were a cult of uneducated degenerate mutants. Now, of course, I think there is a very cowardly streak to the great majority of neutral evil characters I could name in general, because they live for nothing but themselves. There is no higher ideal in their life, nothing they fear more than the loss of their own life. The fear of death, being a motivating factor for characters like these, is therefore rather common. But the level that Darth and Dedu took it to was just so pathetic, his antics even tested the patience of the Sith who would follow in his wake for millennia to come. And Dedu enclosed not merely his own jealously guarded secrets within his holocron, he also hid his own spirit within the artifact as well, hoping to invade the body of another and swap places with the ensnared consciousness of another poor soul. He would rather carry his knowledge and secrets with him to the grave than work for the betterment or advancement of the Sith Order. An immortal who chose to spend untold eons slumbering because he was so crippled by fear. He was perhaps one of the most despicable of the Sith in my eyes. Part of the reason Darth Warlock became one of my personal favorite characters was actually because he finally put this guy in his place. Apparently, once and for all. And so now we come to the final alignment, chaotic evil. A chaotic evil character is diametrically opposed to a lawful good character. He or she will hold no regard for rules, the lives of others, or anything other than their own desires. Not every chaotic evil character needs to be stupid, however a fair few of them seem to be. Even more come across as seriously disturbed or otherwise unhinged. They place a great deal of emphasis on personal freedom. However, this really only pertains to them. They will happily encroach upon the personal freedoms of others if it's what is required for them to achieve their own ends. I do feel, though, that there are a couple of different ways one could define a chaotic evil character, and some can even be considered to be a slave of their own sadistic impulses, or else victims of circumstance in some other cases. However, I'm choosing to stick with the basic archetype this time. Basically, an overzealously combative maniac who commits evil actions because it's what he or she enjoys doing. For me, this has to be the bounty hunter, Dirge. So what makes Dirge chaotic evil, you may be wondering? Well, when confronted by a group of interfering Jedi, Dirge once blasted his KotOR ally because he knew the pressurized methane suit would explode. The distraction tactic resulted in the death of the legendary Jedi Master, Nol Venari, a Bothan who could use the Force to manipulate fire. Although Venari shielded her allies from any sort of fatal harm, the attack also caused a chain reaction which compromised the Separatist base, leading it to sink beneath the flowing currents of lava. This was just one of many missions that Dirge participated in throughout the Clone Wars, laughing and joking as he brutalized countless beings who happened to get in his way, or inadvertently made themselves into targets of opportunity, enemies and friendlies alike. A member of a strange and entirely extraordinary race known as the Jedi, a species with no central nervous system but possessed of an incredible capacity for self-regeneration, Dirge was an unbelievably durable and monstrous opponent, who could easily recover from ostensibly grievous injuries in extremely short periods of time. Other members of the Jedi species shared this trait, as well as enormously long lifespans. While Dirge himself remained a notable exception, the Jedi were a generally introspective and peaceful people. Accounts of Jedi living in excess of 4,000 years were relatively commonplace. Curiously though, this remarkable physical resiliency and the ridiculous longevity which characterized the species did not extend to their mental faculties. Even as their bodies endured through the centuries, their minds would begin to atrophy over time. As a result of this blow to their mental health, combined with their penchant for introspection, many Jedi wrestled with bouts of severe depression, disjointed personalities, psychosis, and other forms of insanity. And here Dirge was no exception. The stresses his body endured as a result of the sort of work he so gleefully engaged in only sped up the rate at which his mind began to splinter. Dirge came to recognize the detrimental effects his actions were having upon his psyche, but this realization was met with indifference. All Dirge cared about was completing his mission as brutally and violently as possible. My favorite example of this would be when he submerged the Jedi Master John Antilles into a river of flowing lava, going so far as to burn off his own hands in the process. Sadistic, irreverent, wasteful, insane, cruel, but also clever and dangerously skilled. Dirge cut a striking figure on the fields of battle, a mightily threatening opponent for almost anybody, and a fearsome embodiment of chaotic evil. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Special thanks to my friends Reti4 and Jensaarai1 for their help with this project. And of course, hats off to Sci-Fi Soup, whose original video inspired this whole thing. As a side note, I feel like pointing out that I began work on this video quite some time ago, and I was forced to put it on hold due to complications arising from just being too busy with real life, a couple of technical difficulties, some complications with the recording equipment, etc. Really no different from any of the other sort of complications I've had with all my other projects. The only reason I'm bringing it up now is because from the time that I began working on this little project of mine to the time of the release, Sci-Fi Soup actually changed his name to Soup the Eternal. I just felt like clarifying that. Anyway, that's enough for me for now. Catch you guys all next time. Until then, may the Force be with you.